The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured gardens of Kensington Palace. 8-year-old Prince George walked slowly along the stone pathway, his small hands clasped behind his back in a way that made him look much older than his years. The weight of royal expectations seemed to rest on his young shoulders, even during what should have been a carefree moment in the garden. Behind him, at a respectful distance, walked Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, a decorated military officer assigned to the prince's personal security detail. Thomas had served in Afghanistan and Iraq, earning numerous commendations for his bravery and dedication. Now his mission was different but no less important, protecting the future King of England. The garden was alive with the sounds of spring. Birds chirped cheerfully in the ancient oak trees, and the gentle buzz of bees filled the air as they moved from flower to flower. But Prince George seemed oblivious to the natural symphony around him. His head was down, his pace slow and deliberate, as if he carried the weight of the world on his small frame. Thomas noticed the change in the young prince's demeanor over the past few weeks. The boy who once ran freely through these same gardens, laughing and playing, now moved with the careful steps of someone much older. The joy that once sparkled in his eyes had dimmed, replaced by a seriousness that troubled the experienced guard. As they walked, Prince George stopped suddenly near a small pond where ducks glided peacefully across the water. He stood there for a long moment, watching the birds with an intensity that seemed unusual for a child his age. Thomas maintained his position, scanning the surroundings for any potential threats while keeping one eye on his young charge. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the gentle splash of the ducks and the distant sound of traffic from the busy London streets beyond the palace walls. In this moment, the contrast between the peaceful garden and the bustling world outside seemed to mirror the complex life that Prince George was being prepared to inherit. Thomas had witnessed many touching moments during his time protecting the royal family, but something about this particular morning felt different. There was an unspoken sadness in the air, a heaviness that even the beautiful spring weather couldn't lift. The young prince seemed lost in thoughts too deep for someone his age, and Thomas found himself wondering what was troubling the boy. The guard's training had taught him to remain alert and professional at all times, but his human instincts told him that something significant was about to happen. The way Prince George stood there, so still and contemplative, suggested that important thoughts were forming in his young mind. As the minutes passed, Thomas noticed other signs that this was no ordinary morning walk. The prince's usual routine of greeting the gardeners was absent. He didn't stop to examine the flowers or chase the butterflies that danced around the lavender bushes. Instead, he remained focused on the pond, as if searching for answers in the gentle ripples created by the swimming ducks. The experienced guard had learned to read people during his military service, a skill that served him well in his current role. He could sense when someone was preparing to make an important decision, and every fiber of his being told him that Prince George was wrestling with something significant. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the sweet scent of blooming roses and the fresh smell of recently watered grass. It should have been a perfect day for a young boy to enjoy the outdoors, yet Prince George seemed trapped in his own thoughts, distant from the beauty that surrounded him. Thomas remembered his own childhood, spent in a small town far from the grandeur of royal palaces. He had been free to make mistakes, to learn through play, to simply be a child without the constant scrutiny that followed Prince George everywhere he went. The comparison made him appreciate the unique challenges faced by this remarkable young boy. As they continued their walk, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that this morning would be different from all the others. The way Prince George moved, the thoughtful expression on his face, and the unusual silence all pointed to something important brewing beneath the surface. The guard's protective instincts remained sharp, but his heart was touched by the obvious struggle he witnessed in the young prince. Here was a child trying to navigate a world of incredible privilege and equally incredible responsibility, and Thomas found himself wanting to do more than just protect the boy's physical safety. The garden path led them past the greenhouse where the palace's exotic plants were cultivated. Prince George paused again, this time looking up at Thomas with eyes that seemed to hold questions too complex for his young age. In that moment, the professional distance between guard and protected began to blur, setting the stage for what would become an unforgettable encounter between two very different souls, brought together by duty and circumstance. Prince George turned away from the pond and looked directly at Sergeant Mitchell for the first time that morning. His blue eyes, so much like his father's, held a maturity that seemed beyond his 8 years. The young prince took a small step closer to his guard, breaking the invisible barrier that protocol usually maintained between them. "Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever wish you could just walk away from everything?" The question caught Thomas completely off guard. In all his years of military service and royal protection duty, he had never been asked something so direct, so personal by someone so young. He looked down at the small boy standing before him, searching for the right words to respond to such an unexpected inquiry. Thomas knelt down slowly, bringing himself to Prince George's eye level. His military training told him to maintain professional distance, but his human instincts recognized a child in need of genuine connection. The formal protocols that governed every interaction within the palace walls suddenly seemed less important than the vulnerable young person standing before him. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas began carefully, "that's a very thoughtful question. May I ask what's making you think about such things?" Prince George kicked at a small pebble on the garden path, his hand still clasped behind his back. The gesture was so normal, so childlike, that it reminded Thomas of the enormous burden this young boy carried. Every move Prince George made was watched, analyzed, and often criticized by a world that expected perfection from someone who was still learning to tie his shoes properly. "Sometimes I watch the children playing in the park when we drive past," Prince George continued, his voice gaining strength. "They run and laugh and nobody follows them around with cameras. They can make mistakes without everyone talking about it on television. They can just be children." The honesty in the prince's words struck Thomas deeply. Here was a child articulating feelings that many adults in similar positions struggled to express. The weight of royal responsibility, something that would only grow heavier as Prince George matured, was already beginning to shape his understanding of the world and his place in it. Thomas thought carefully before responding. His role was to protect Prince George physically, but in this moment he sensed that the young prince needed protection of a different kind. He needed someone to acknowledge his feelings without trying to fix them or explain them away with talk of duty and privilege. "I understand what you mean," Thomas said gently. "It must be difficult to always feel like you're living under a microscope. But you know, even those children in the park have their own challenges. Everyone carries something, Your Royal Highness, even if we can't see it from the outside." Prince George considered this for a moment, his young mind processing the guard's words. The spring breeze rustled the leaves overhead, creating a natural soundtrack to their conversation. In the distance, the sound of lawnmowers could be heard as the groundskeepers maintained the pristine appearance of the palace gardens. "But they get to choose," Prince George replied, showing wisdom that surprised Thomas. "They can decide if they want to be doctors or teachers or football players. I already know what I'm going to be, and I never got to choose." The simple truth of the statement hung in the air between them. Thomas realized that he was witnessing something remarkable, a young boy grappling with concepts of destiny, choice, and personal freedom that most people didn't confront until much later in life. The future King of England was questioning his fate at an age when most children were worried about playground games and homework. Thomas stood up slowly, his mind racing as he tried to find words that would comfort without dismissing the prince's legitimate concerns. The responsibility he felt in this moment went far beyond his security duties. He was being trusted with the private thoughts and feelings of someone whose life would impact millions of people. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said carefully, "while it's true that your path has been chosen for you in many ways, you still have choices within that path. You can choose how you serve, how you treat people, what causes you support. You can choose the kind of king you want to become." Prince George looked up at him with interest as if this perspective hadn't occurred to him before. The boy's intelligence was evident in the way he processed new information, turning it over in his mind before responding. Thomas could see the wheels turning as Prince George considered this different way of looking at his predetermined future. The garden around them continued its peaceful existence, unaware of the profound conversation taking place on the stone pathway. Butterflies danced among the flower beds, and the ducks in the pond continued their leisurely swim, creating ripples that caught the morning sunlight. "I never thought about it that way," Prince George admitted, his voice thoughtful. "So even though I have to be king, I can still choose what kind of king to be?" Thomas smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest as he watched understanding dawn in the young prince's eyes. This was why he had joined the military, why he had accepted this assignment, to make a difference, to serve something greater than himself. In this moment, he realized that protecting Prince George meant more than just keeping him safe from physical harm. Exactly, Thomas confirmed. And that's a very powerful choice, Your Royal Highness. The kind of choice that can change the world. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn, leading both the guard and the prince into territory that neither had anticipated when they began their morning walk. But sometimes the most important moments in life come without warning, appearing in the quiet spaces between scheduled events and formal protocols. The conversation had opened something between Prince George and Sergeant Mitchell that went beyond their official roles. As they continued walking through the garden, the young prince seemed more relaxed, his steps lighter than they had been at the beginning of their walk. The heavy burden he carried hadn't disappeared, but sharing his thoughts had somehow made it more manageable. Sergeant Mitchell, Prince George said as they approached a beautiful rose garden where his great-grandmother used to spend her afternoons. "You've been to war, haven't you?" Thomas nodded, memories of his military service flashing through his mind. The question was unexpected but not unwelcome. He had learned to speak honestly about his experiences while being mindful of his audience. Speaking to an 8-year-old about war required careful consideration of what details to share and which ones to keep private. "Yes, Your Royal Highness, I have. I served in Afghanistan and Iraq. It was difficult, but it taught me a lot about courage, sacrifice, and what really matters in life." Prince George stopped walking and turned to face Thomas fully. His young face was serious, but there was a new kind of respect in his eyes. The boy was beginning to understand that the man assigned to protect him had his own story, his own challenges and triumphs that had shaped him into the person he was today. "Were you scared?" Prince George asked with the directness that only children possess. Thomas smiled at the honesty of the question. In the formal world of royal protocol, such personal inquiries were rare. But here in the peaceful garden with only the birds as witnesses, the barriers between them continued to fall away. "Yes, I was scared sometimes," Thomas admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's about doing what's right even when you are afraid." The young prince considered this carefully, relating it to his own fears about the future that awaited him. The pressure to be perfect, to never make mistakes, to always represent the crown with dignity, these were his own battles, different from those fought on foreign soil but requiring courage nonetheless. "I'm scared too," Prince George confessed quietly. "I'm scared of disappointing people. I'm scared of making mistakes that everyone will see. I'm scared of not being good enough to be king." The vulnerability in the young prince's voice touched something deep in Thomas's heart. Here was a child carrying fears that would challenge even the strongest adults. The weight of an entire nation's expectations rested on shoulders that should only be concerned with school projects and birthday parties. Thomas knelt down again, looking directly into Prince George's eyes. In this moment, he wasn't speaking to the future King of England. He was speaking to a frightened child who needed reassurance and understanding. "Your Royal Highness, the fact that you're thinking about these things, that you care so much about doing right by people, tells me that you're already going to be a wonderful king. The best leaders are often those who question themselves, who worry about their responsibilities, because it means they take them seriously." Prince George's expression brightened slightly, as if a small light had been turned on in a dark room. The validation from someone he respected meant more than all the formal praise he received during official functions. This was real, honest feedback from someone who had proven himself in the most challenging circumstances. The garden path led them to a secluded bench surrounded by blooming lavender. The sweet scent filled the air around them, and the gentle buzzing of bees created a peaceful soundtrack to their continued conversation. Prince George climbed onto the bench, his short legs swinging freely as he looked out at the expanse of gardens that surrounded them. "Sometimes I pretend I'm just a normal boy," Prince George said, his voice dreamy. "I imagine going to a regular school where nobody knows who I am, playing football without photographers watching, eating ice cream without someone checking if it's appropriate for a royal to enjoy dessert in public." Thomas sat beside him on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough to continue their intimate conversation. The image of Prince George as just another 8-year-old boy was both sweet and heartbreaking. The simple pleasures that most children took for granted were complicated for him by protocol and public scrutiny. "Those dreams aren't silly," Thomas assured him. "It's natural to wonder what a different life might be like. But you know what I think? I think the experiences you're having, even the difficult ones, are preparing you to understand and help people in ways that someone who never faced challenges couldn't." The young prince turned to look at Thomas, curiosity evident in his expression. He was beginning to see his unique position, not just as a burden, but as something that might have purpose and meaning beyond what he had previously understood. "What do you mean?" Prince George asked. "Well," Thomas explained, "because you understand what it feels like to have pressure and expectations, you'll be able to help others who feel the same way. Because you know what it's like to have every move watched and judged, you'll be more understanding when you meet people who are struggling with their own challenges." The conversation was helping Prince George see his future role from a completely different perspective. Instead of viewing his position as something that was being forced upon him, he was beginning to understand it as an opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting dappled shadows through the tree leaves onto the garden path. The peaceful setting provided the perfect backdrop for these profound revelations between a young prince learning about his destiny and a dedicated guard sharing his wisdom and experience. As they sat on the bench surrounded by the fragrant lavender, Prince George became quiet again. His small hands folded in his lap, and Thomas could see the young mind processing everything they had discussed. The weight of understanding his future role was settling on the prince's shoulders in a new way, not just as a burden, but as a responsibility that could bring meaning to his life. "Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George said after a long pause, "do you think people will like me when I'm king? I mean really like me, not just pretend because they have to?" The question revealed the deep insecurity that lay beneath the royal exterior. Despite all the privileges and advantages of his position, Prince George faced the same fundamental human need for acceptance and genuine connection that every child experiences. The difference was that his future relationships would always be complicated by his status and the power he would wield. Thomas considered his response carefully. He had observed the royal family during public engagements and had seen the genuine warmth that Prince George already displayed toward others. The boy had a natural kindness that couldn't be taught or manufactured. It was simply part of who he was. "Your Royal Highness, I've watched you interact with people during official visits. I've seen how you remember the names of the staff here at the palace, how you always say thank you to the drivers and the cooks. These aren't things you do because someone told you to. They come from your heart." Prince George looked up at Thomas with surprise, as if he hadn't realized that these small gestures were being noticed or that they mattered. In his young mind, being polite and kind was simply the right thing to do, not something that would shape how people perceived him as a future leader. "But what if I make mistakes?" Prince George asked, his voice small. "What if I say the wrong thing or do something embarrassing? Everyone will see it, and they'll think I'm not good enough to be king." Thomas smiled gently, remembering his own mistakes during his military career and how each one had taught him valuable lessons. The fear of failure was universal, but for Prince George the stakes seemed impossibly high because of the public nature of his future role. "You will make mistakes," Thomas said honestly. "Everyone does. Even kings and queens make mistakes. But what matters is how you handle them, how you learn from them, and how you use them to become better." The young prince considered this, his brow furrowed in concentration. The idea that making mistakes might be acceptable, even normal, was revolutionary to someone who had been taught from birth that every action would be scrutinized and judged. A gentle breeze stirred the lavender around them, releasing another wave of its calming scent. In the distance, they could hear the sound of children playing in a nearby park, their laughter carrying on the wind. The contrast between their carefree joy and Prince George's serious contemplation of his future responsibilities was stark. "I heard my father talking to my mother last night," Prince George confided, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "He was worried about the pressure on our family, about whether they were preparing me properly for what's coming. He didn't know I was listening, but I couldn't sleep." Thomas felt a pang of sympathy for the entire royal family. The burden of preparing a child for such an enormous responsibility, while trying to give him a normal childhood, was an impossible balance to strike. Every parent worried about their child's future, but few face the unique challenges of raising a future monarch. Your parents love you very much, Thomas said softly. They want to protect you while also preparing you for your role. It's one of the most difficult things any parent could face, and they're doing their best to navigate it. Prince George nodded slowly, some of the tension leaving his small shoulders. Understanding that his parents were also struggling with the complexities of his situation helped him feel less alone in his worries and fears. Sometimes I wonder what my great-grandmother would say, Prince George mused, referring to Queen Elizabeth II, who had recently passed away. She was queen for so long, and everyone respected her. Do you think she ever felt scared like I do? Thomas had great respect for the late queen, having served under her reign during his military career. He had witnessed her dedication to duty and her unwavering commitment to her role, but he had also recognized the human being beneath the crown. I believe she did feel scared sometimes. Thomas replied thoughtfully. She became queen when she was very young, much younger than most people are when they take on such responsibility. But she faced her fears with grace and determination, and that's what made her such a remarkable leader. The comparison to his beloved great-grandmother seemed to comfort Prince George. Knowing that even she had experienced doubts and fears made his own feelings seem more normal, more manageable. The legacy she had left was not one of perfection, but of service, dedication, and steadfast commitment to her people. I want to make her proud, Prince George said quietly. I want to make everyone proud, but I don't know if I'm strong enough. Thomas looked at the young boy sitting beside him, seeing not just the future king, but the brave child who was already facing his fears and asking difficult questions about his purpose in life. The strength Prince George was looking for was already there, evident in his willingness to confront his anxieties and seek understanding about his role. Your Royal Highness, Thomas said with conviction, the fact that you care so much about honoring her memory and serving your people tells me that you already have the strength you need. It may not feel like it right now, but it's there, growing stronger every day. After their heartfelt conversation on the bench, Prince George stood up and began walking again, but this time his pace was different. There was a new determination in his step, as if something had shifted inside him during their talk. Thomas followed, maintaining his protective watch while giving the young prince space to process his thoughts. They walked toward the palace's rose garden, where generations of royals had found solace among the carefully tended blooms. Prince George stopped in front of a particularly beautiful white rose bush, its flowers perfect and pristine in the morning light. He reached out carefully, touching one of the petals with a gentle finger. These roses are beautiful because someone takes care of them every day, Prince George observed quietly. The gardeners water them, prune them, protect them from diseases. They don't just grow perfectly on their own. Thomas recognized the metaphor the young prince was drawing. The wisdom in the observation impressed him. Prince George was beginning to understand that leadership, like gardening, required constant attention, care, and dedication. It wasn't something that happened automatically because of birthright. That's very insightful, Your Royal Highness, Thomas said. Good leaders, like beautiful gardens, need tending. They need to keep learning, growing, and improving themselves. Prince George nodded, his young mind clearly working through complex ideas about responsibility and growth. The conversation had awakened something in him, a recognition that his future role wasn't just something that would happen to him, but something he could actively shape and prepare for. Sergeant Mitchell, Prince George said, turning away from the roses to face his guard. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about having choices within my path. I think I've made a decision. The seriousness in the young prince's voice caught Thomas's attention immediately. There was something different about the way Prince George was speaking now, more confident, more resolved. The scared little boy from earlier in their walk had been replaced by someone who seemed older, more mature. What decision is that, Your Royal Highness? Thomas asked gently. Prince George stood up straighter, his posture reflecting the royal bearing that had been taught to him since he could walk. But now, instead of seeming like a costume he was forced to wear, it appeared to come from within, a natural expression of the responsibility he was beginning to embrace. I've decided that I don't want to spend my life wishing I could walk away, Prince George said with quiet determination. I want to spend it learning how to walk toward the people who need help. I want to be the kind of king who makes a real difference. The transformation in the young prince was remarkable. Thomas had witnessed many moments of courage during his military service, but there was something particularly moving about watching an 8-year-old boy choose to embrace a destiny he had initially feared. "That's a very brave decision, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "What changed your mind?" Prince George looked back at the roses, then at the expansive gardens around them, and finally at the palace that would one day be his responsibility to represent with honor and dignity. "You helped me understand that being king isn't about what I can't do or what I have to give up," Prince George explained. "It's about what I can do for other people. It's about using my position to help those who don't have the same advantages I have." The clarity of the young prince's vision was impressive. In the span of one morning conversation, he had moved from seeing his future as a burden to viewing it as an opportunity for service. The shift represented a fundamental change in how he understood his role and his purpose. Thomas felt a deep sense of pride and responsibility. He had been assigned to protect Prince George's physical safety, but in this moment, he realized he had also played a role in protecting something equally important: the young prince's sense of hope and purpose. "I think your great-grandmother would be very proud of that decision," Thomas said softly. "And I think the people you'll serve one day will be fortunate to have a king who cares so deeply about their well-being." Prince George smiled then, the first genuine smile Thomas had seen from him all morning. It transformed his entire face, bringing back the childlike joy that had been overshadowed by his worries and fears. The weight of his future responsibilities hadn't disappeared, but he had found a way to carry it with grace and purpose. "I still get scared sometimes," Prince George admitted. "But now I think maybe being a little scared is okay, as long as I don't let it stop me from trying to help people." The wisdom in those words would have been impressive coming from someone 3 times his age. Thomas realized he was witnessing the birth of what could become truly exceptional leadership. Leadership rooted not in entitlement or power, but in empathy, service, and genuine care for others. As they stood among the roses, with the morning sun growing stronger and the palace grounds coming alive with the day's activities, something profound had shifted. Prince George had made a choice that would shape not only his own future but potentially the future of the monarchy itself. The young prince looked up at Thomas with eyes that now held determination instead of fear. "Will you help me learn how to be the kind of king I want to become?" he asked. Thomas felt honored by the request, understanding that he was being asked to be more than just a bodyguard. He was being asked to be a mentor, a guide and a friend to someone whose decisions would one day affect millions of people. The request from Prince George touched Thomas deeply. In that moment, standing among the roses with the future King of England asking for his guidance, Thomas understood that his role was evolving into something far more significant than he had ever imagined. The young prince wasn't just asking for protection anymore. He was asking for partnership in becoming the leader he wanted to be. "It would be my honor to help you, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied, his voice thick with emotion. "But I think you should know that you're already teaching me things too. Your courage today, your willingness to face your fears and choose service over self-pity, that's inspired me more than you know." Prince George looked surprised by this admission. The idea that he as a child could teach or inspire an experienced military officer was new to him. It was another piece of the puzzle he was putting together about leadership, that it involved learning from others regardless of their age or position. "What did I teach you?" Prince George asked with genuine curiosity. Thomas thought carefully about how to express what he had witnessed that morning. The transformation he had seen in the young prince was remarkable, but it was the process of that transformation that had been most inspiring. The willingness to question, to struggle with difficult emotions, and ultimately to choose growth over comfort. "You taught me that real strength isn't about not being afraid," Thomas explained. "It's about feeling the fear and choosing to do what's right anyway. You also showed me that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Many adults struggle to do what you did today." Prince George walked slowly toward a small fountain in the center of the rose garden. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the gentle sound of it flowing created a peaceful atmosphere for their continued conversation. He sat on the edge of the fountain, trailing his fingers in the cool water. "I want to start practicing being the kind of king I decided to become," Prince George said thoughtfully, "but I don't know how to begin." Everything I do is planned by other people, and I don't get to meet many people who aren't part of the palace or official visits. This was indeed a challenge. The protected life that Prince George lived, while necessary for his safety, also limited his exposure to the real experiences of ordinary people. Thomas recognized that if the young prince was going to lead with empathy and understanding, he would need to find ways to connect with people from all walks of life. "Perhaps we could ask your parents about arranging some different kinds of visits," Thomas suggested. "Maybe spending time at schools, community centers, or charity organizations where you could meet people in more relaxed settings. Not formal royal visits, but opportunities to listen and learn." Prince George's eyes lit up at the suggestion. The idea of meeting people without all the ceremony and protocol of official engagements appealed to him greatly. He wanted to understand the lives and challenges of the people he would one day serve, not just shake their hands and smile for photographs. "Could we really do that?" Prince George asked eagerly. "Could I go places where people are just being themselves, not trying to impress me or say the right things because I'm a prince?" Thomas smiled at the young prince's enthusiasm. The desire to connect authentically with people was exactly the kind of quality that would make him an exceptional leader. It showed that his decision to embrace his role wasn't just intellectual, it came from a genuine care for others. "I think we can work on making that happen," Thomas assured him. "Your parents want you to be prepared for your future role, and understanding your people is an important part of that preparation." Prince George stood up from the fountain, his movements more energetic than they had been all morning. The decision he had made was giving him a sense of purpose and direction that transformed his entire demeanor. The sullen, worried child from the beginning of their walk had been replaced by someone with vision and determination. "I want to learn about different jobs, different families, different problems people face," Prince George said excitedly. "I want to understand what it's like to worry about money, or to take care of sick family members, or to struggle in school. How can I help people if I don't understand their lives?" The questions Prince George was asking demonstrated remarkable maturity and insight. Thomas realized that the young prince was developing the kind of emotional intelligence that would serve him well as a leader. His willingness to acknowledge his own limited experience and actively seek to expand it was impressive. As they began walking back toward the palace, Thomas noticed that other staff members were beginning their daily routines in the gardens. A few gardeners waved respectfully as they passed, and Prince George waved back with genuine warmth. The interactions, though brief, seemed different somehow, more personal, more connected. "Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George said as they approached the palace, "I want you to know that this conversation changed everything for me. I feel like I understand myself and my future differently now. Thank you for listening to me and for helping me see things in a new way." The gratitude in the young prince's voice was deeply moving. Thomas realized that he had been privileged to witness and participate in a pivotal moment in Prince George's development. The boy who would one day be king had chosen his path consciously, with full awareness of both its challenges and its opportunities. "Thank you for trusting me with your thoughts and feelings, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied. "It's been an honor to share this morning with you." As they reached the palace steps, Prince George paused and looked back at the gardens where their transformative conversation had taken place. The roses continued to bloom, the fountain continued to flow, and the ducks still glided peacefully across the pond. But something fundamental had changed in those peaceful surroundings. A future king had been born not through birthright, but through choice. 3 months had passed since that transformative morning in the palace gardens. Prince George had indeed begun visiting community centers, schools, and local organizations, always accompanied by Sergeant Mitchell. The young prince's genuine curiosity and natural kindness had touched everyone they met, and Thomas had watched with pride as the boy's confidence and understanding grew with each encounter. The changes in Prince George were remarkable. He no longer walked with the heavy steps of someone carrying an unwanted burden. Instead, he moved with purpose and enthusiasm, eager to learn about the world he would one day help lead. His questions during their visits were thoughtful and showed a deep desire to understand people's experiences and challenges. One afternoon, as they returned from visiting a local children's hospital where Prince George had spent time reading to young patients, Thomas received an unexpected phone call. His commanding officer informed him that he was being reassigned to a special diplomatic security position overseas, an honor that recognized his exceptional service and his unique skills in both military and civilian protection roles. The news should have been exciting. The new position would advance his career significantly and give him opportunities to serve his country in new ways. But as Thomas looked at Prince George, who was animatedly telling him about a story one of the children had shared, he felt a profound sadness about leaving. That evening, Thomas requested a private meeting with Prince George's parents to discuss the situation. The meeting took place in a comfortable sitting room, away from the formal spaces where official business was usually conducted. Thomas explained his reassignment and expressed his concerns about leaving Prince George during such an important period of his development. "Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George's father said thoughtfully, "we're grateful for everything you've done for George. We've seen the positive changes in him, and we know that your guidance has played a significant role in his growth. This new assignment is a tremendous opportunity for you." Thomas nodded, understanding the wisdom in the words but still struggling with the decision. His duty to his country was clear, but his bond with Prince George had become something deeper than a professional assignment. He had become invested in the young prince's journey toward becoming the leader he was meant to be. The next morning, Thomas walked with Prince George through the gardens where their relationship had first deepened. The roses were in full bloom again, and the fountain sparkled in the summer sunlight. Prince George seemed to sense that something was different, though Thomas hadn't yet told him about the reassignment. "You seem worried about something, Sergeant Mitchell," Prince George observed with the perceptiveness that had developed over their months together. "Is everything all right?" Thomas had been dreading this conversation, but he knew that Prince George deserved honesty and respect. The young prince had grown so much since their first deep conversation, and Thomas believed he was ready to handle difficult news with maturity. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas began carefully, "I've received new orders. I'm being assigned to a diplomatic security position overseas. It's a great honor, but it means I'll be leaving my position here with you." Prince George stopped walking and looked up at Thomas with surprise and sadness. The news was clearly unexpected and unwelcome. For a moment, the confident young leader disappeared, replaced by the 8-year-old boy who had formed a deep friendship with his protector. "When do you have to go?" Prince George asked quietly. "In 2 weeks," Thomas replied, his own voice heavy with emotion. Prince George was quiet for a long time, processing the news and working through his feelings. Thomas watched as the young prince drew on the emotional strength and maturity he had developed over the past months. When Prince George finally spoke, his words showed remarkable wisdom and grace. "I'm sad that you're leaving," Prince George said honestly. "You've become more than my guard. You've become my friend and teacher. But I understand that you have your own duty to serve, just like I have mine. This is your choice within your path, isn't it?" The reference to their earlier conversation about choices within predetermined paths showed Thomas how deeply those lessons had resonated with Prince George. The young prince was applying the wisdom they had discussed to this difficult situation, demonstrating genuine understanding and personal growth. "Yes, it is," Thomas confirmed, moved by Prince George's mature response. "And you've taught me that sometimes the hardest choices are also the most important ones." Prince George nodded thoughtfully, then surprised Thomas by reaching out and taking his hand, a gesture that broke protocol but felt completely natural and appropriate given their relationship. "Thank you for helping me understand who I want to become," Prince George said sincerely. "I promise I'll keep working to be the kind of king we talked about. I'll remember everything you taught me about courage, service, and making choices that help other people." Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes as he looked down at the remarkable young person holding his hand. In that moment, he realized that while he was leaving Prince George physically, the impact of their relationship would continue. The lessons they had shared would live on in the choices Prince George made and the leader he became. "And I'll always remember what you taught me about strength, wisdom, and the courage to become who you're meant to be," Thomas replied. "You're going to be an extraordinary king, Your Royal Highness. I have no doubt about that." As they stood together in the garden where their friendship had begun, both the guard and the prince understood that some connections transcend titles and positions. Thomas would leave to serve his country in a new way, but he would carry with him the memory of helping shape a future king who chose service over self-interest, courage over comfort, and hope over fear. The guard walked away that day, but he left behind a young prince who was no longer walking away from his destiny, but walking confidently toward it. ready to serve his people with wisdom, compassion, and strength. The quiet decision made in a palace garden would ripple forward through time, touching countless lives through the leader Prince George was determined to become.